Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer 4th Anniversary Show, live from Bobalu Cigar Company in Austin, Texas. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 232 of the Dudes and Beer podcast, our official 4th anniversary show. Unfortunately, we did have some technical issues live and had a corrupted file from Jeff Lipton, our good friend at Bobalu Cigars. So sorry for that, Jeff. We know that we will be back with you. We have some great episodes in the past, and we know that we will be back at Bobalu to get some more great interviews with you guys about the fantastic products y'all put out. Thank you so much for hosting us as always. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of our 4th anniversary episode, my 44th birthday. Some great stuff from John Bowne, and as well as some fantastic stuff from our good guest, Graham Phillips.
And the hottest and latest, and we throw a lot of stuff up on the wall, and fortunately for us, a few things stick here and there.
Yeah, and tell everybody where they can go to get their Bobalu cigars, where they can come here in town whenever they're in Austin to come by, enjoy a nice stick, stuff like that, before we get on with the rest of the program here.
Okay, well, you can go to our website, Bobalu, BOBALU.com, and you can buy the cigars. We ship everywhere in the United States. If you're out of the United States, call us. We'll see if we can ship something out to where you're at. The deal with us is we are factory direct. You're buying direct from the factory. There is no middleman, no distributors, no people marking it up. You buy from us, you're buying factory direct. That's been our mantra since day one, and it's been pretty good for us. And check us out. We'll try harder for your business, I promise you.
And I guarantee you won't be disappointed. My personal favorite thing is actually the Cigar Club. Becoming a member definitely has its privileges, folks. Tell them a little bit about the Bobalu Cigar Club.
Well,
and how they can join.
Being the factory, we can do some things that your cigar stores can't do. We have, for $50 a year, you can join our Buyers Club, and you can buy all the cigars singly, buy one, get one. So you buy one, you're going to get another one free on all the single cigars you want. If you buy them by the box, which we discount already, you get another 10% off our box price. So if you like to try this and that, and you want to try 5 or 6 of our 25 lines, and you like to have lots of different stuff in your humidor, this is the way to go, because you're going to get a great deal on the cigars. I always say, if you like the cigar at $7.95, you'll love it at half price.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's such an incredible savings. If you're someone like me that actually has your own business, stuff like that, if you have a special occasion coming up, you can have one of the Bobalu rollers come out live to your event. You can have custom label cigars made, all that kind of stuff.
Well, we do travel the entire country, because if you and take our cigar rolling to trade shows and weddings and golf tournaments and that kind of thing, there's very few of that anywhere around. If you're not in Miami or Tampa, say, for instance, you're probably not seeing cigar rollers. Very popular. We travel the country. We also do the custom labeled cigars. So if you want to have your name, your company name, your favorite football team, whatever it may be that floats your boat, we can put it on your cigars. And you can have a cigar, when you break it out to your buddies and your friends or your business associates with your logo on it, they're going to flip out. And these are not cigars some guy is banding in his extra bedroom.
Yeah, it's not a bunch of punch or blunts or something like that.
These are real top quality cigars that you're going to be proud to hand somebody, and you're going to have your logo on it, and people the one thing people do like to see their names and on the cigars.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. And we do that, and we do it very quickly and for cheaper than you can probably go buy a box of cigars somewhere else. So those are some of the things we do, and we're proud of them. We do it very well. That's why you can still be in business, close to 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for always supporting Dudes and Beer, for letting us come here, have our shows, for everything that you do for local Austin music, all kinds of stuff.
Well, Dudes and Beer, cigars.
Yeah.
Can there be any better?
Yeah, cigars, conversation.
We got it all. So this is what it's about, and this is cigars only add to it. So
that's it.
Give us a call. We'd love to have you. We love having you over here, and hope to do lots more with you guys. Absolutely.
Well, on that note, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We do actually have a small gift for you. That is coming up right now. Pay attention, everybody. Here's a great spot. Nothing quite like the flavor of a fine cigar. That's why at Bobalu Cigar, we take the time to make the best cigars you can find. Every Bobalu cigar is hand-rolled on site by our skilled torsadores, guaranteeing your total satisfaction in every draw, from first light to last dash. Have a wedding or fundraiser? About to get married or have a baby? Are you signing a big contract or opening a new business? No matter the celebration, Bobalu Cigars is here to help. With our custom label cigar service, you can get a box of your favorite Bobalu cigars with your company name, logo, or message printed right on the ring. You can even have Bobalu come roll cigars live at your event. Join the Buyers Club and get half off every cigar every time you buy. Stop on by BobaluCigar.com and place your order, or give us a call at 1-888-332-4427. Visit us online at Bobalu.com today. That's right, everybody. Stop on by Bobalu.com to get your great cigars hand-rolled just for you. Coming up now, we have a great report by our in-house reporter, John Bowne, from Daily News Collective about the issues of loneliness going on in our society.
NBC contributor Marcy Bianco, a self-described writer, editor, cultural critic, and your favorite lesbian feminist, recently wrote this in her piece titled "Miley Cyrus's Split with Liam Hemsworth Isn't Just Celebrity Gossip, It's a Blow to the Patriarchy." Quote, "Men need heterosexuality to maintain their societal dominance over women. Women, on the other hand, are increasingly realizing not only that they don't need heterosexuality, but that it also is often the bedrock of their global oppression. The nonsensical radical idea that women are increasingly realizing that they don't need healthy heterosexual relationships based on the lifestyle of Miley Cyrus, whose divorce was inevitable, wasn't because Miley was victimized by global oppression. It was due to her inability to maintain a healthy heterosexual relationship. Some women just aren't ready or willing to take on the raw reality required of a partner in a caring monogamous relationship, emboldened by the synthesis of matriarchal and patriarchal norms in the Western world." Bianco was echoing a message bubbling amongst feminists for years.
We need to kill all men. I am sick of being a baby factory that produces more men that will just, in the future, subjugate me. So the only answer to that is to kill male babies and just kill any man that you see, like in the streets, like any swing dick, just kill him. Because we want the species to go on, but we want it only to go on with women in it. So that's what we have to do. That's the only way to keep the human race going, is with just women.
This is the rabid underbelly of the diatribe among the left. And if heterosexuality is on a sharp decline, as Marcy Bianco claims, wouldn't a straight pride parade make sense and draw support?
A large crowd forms on McHenry Street in Modesto. People holding signs, making noise, and speaking out against this man, Don Grundman. For weeks, he's advertised having a straight pride event.
This is an example of free speech in our country. It's a one-way street. They want free speech, but they won't give us free speech.
When he showed up this afternoon, people against his message say they wanted to outnumber him, surrounding his sign promoting the Straight Pride Coalition.
Apathy and not confronting fascists when they come out into society, into the public space, into our communities, it makes it unsafe for queer people, people of color.
The actual reality is that 2.2% of the American male population identifies as gay, while 1.1% identifies lesbian. And it's not because the LGBT community is oppressed, as 63% of Americans believe homosexuality is morally acceptable. But what is actually increasing is an epidemic trend of loneliness, as a general social survey discovered that the number of Americans with no close friends has tripled since 1985. In fact, a study published in the U.S. National Library of Medicine National Institutes of Health revealed that characteristics of socially isolated patients with coronary artery disease are at an elevated risk for mortality. Simply put, loneliness is killing us, and as those numbers skyrocket, Mockingbird mainstream media outlets irresponsibly seed the mental illness of pseudo-racism, nationalized self-loathing, and radical feminism, compounding the isolation, echoing the projection of the fears of the LGBT community, a minority community otherwise overwhelmingly accepted by Americans, fomenting a leftist echo chamber hell-bent on forcing the majority of us just trying to live our short natural lives to all choke on fantastical notions of guilt and oppressive propaganda. John Bowne reporting.
John Bowne always does such a great job just distilling things. The fact that loneliness is the overarching issue in our society that, like Jeff and I were just sitting here talking about during that report, that people don't get out. They don't go out and talk to each other anymore. They just, we are isolated. More and more studies show it. Despite social media, everything else, we're more distant than ever from each other.
Let me tell you something. It is an epidemic, and people in this fake Facebook, Instagram world where everybody's life is so good. Well, you peel back the layers, and everybody's got issues just like you. So we need to figure out what's going on with these kids, because it's
well,
sad.
And it's all of us. That's the thing. It's every single one of us. I mean, that's what we have this show for, is the fact that we don't take the time to sit down and smoke a cigar and disagree and be okay with disagreeing.
That's right.
Just listening to each other,
that is part of the thing about cigar smoking, is you can sit down with complete opposites and have a civil conversation and walk out and do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Just like our founding fathers used to do in the tavern. Come in, the tavern was the local gathering place. Everybody from the mayor to the governor to the lowly pig farmer all went to the same tavern. There was a tavern in town. They occupied the same bar stools. They disagreed politically, economically, religiously, and then came back to the same bar stools and still had open discussions and still shared fence lines. And when things got rough in the winter, I came and got wood from you, and you came and got vegetables from me. We've lost that. We've kind of lost that way. And what's interesting is that our main guest tonight, Graham Phillips, talks a lot about the lost wisdom of Stonehenge and the people that built Stonehenge, and how we're trying to actively recover the knowledge of a lost society that built something, and just 500 years later, the people literally forgot how they built it. Literally. Here we are at almost 200 years, just over 200 years of the United States existing. And we're up against the same thing right now. We've lost our way as a society. We've kind of forgotten a lot of what founded us. And getting into that is so interesting. Our guest this evening is Graham Phillips. He is world-renowned author, one of the main people out there researching the history of Stonehenge, the lost history of Stonehenge. Before we get into that, though, we do have a quick little segment that we've started recently called Ask Alexa, where we ask Amazon's Alexa different questions. And in honor of our guest this evening, we have decided to ask Alexa's AI, what is Stonehenge and what was it for? So let's see what Alexa has to say to us tonight. Alexa, what is Stonehenge?
Stonehenge, the ancient monument on Salisbury Plain, England, built about 4,500 years ago.
Alexa, who built Stonehenge?
Here's what I found on Wikipedia. No one knows who built Stonehenge or why they built it.
Alexa, what was Stonehenge used for?
Here's what I found on reference.com. No one knows what Stonehenge was used for, but its solstice alignment and burial sites found in the complex indicate it was probably used for ceremonies concerning the dead. More far-fetched theories include use as an alien landing strip or as a healing temple.
Alexa, what is Stonehenge made of?
The material of Stonehenge is sarsen.
Alexa, what is sarsen stone?
Sarsen stones are sandstone blocks found in quantity in the United Kingdom on Salisbury Plain and the Marlborough Downs in Wiltshire, in Kent, and in smaller quantities in Berkshire, Essex, Oxfordshire, Dorset, and Hampshire. They are the post-glacial remains of a cap of Cenozoic siltcrete that once covered much of southern England, a dense, hard rock created from sand bound by a silica cement, making it a kind of silicified sandstone.
Alexa, what is some of the mythology behind Stonehenge?
Here's something I found on Wikipedia. Stonehenge has been the subject of many theories about its origin, ranging from the academic worlds of archaeology to explanations from mythology and the paranormal.
Alexa, what is a megalithic culture?
Sorry,
my favorite.
I don't know that, but I do have a skill you might like. It's called What Is My Unicorn Doing? Want to try it?
Yes.
Okay, here's What Is My Unicorn Doing? Your unicorn is munching on fallen apples in the castle orchard.
Alexa doesn't know what a megalithic culture is doing, but she'll gladly give me a unicorn, folks, and let me know whatever it's doing anywhere in the world. So now I can literally go to Alexa and say, Alexa, what's my unicorn doing? And she will give me an update. All that for trying to find out what Stonehenge is all about. That is what our guest is here for tonight, folks. The book is Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge. Let's enjoy a great interview with world-renowned author Graham Phillips. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this amazing live fourth anniversary broadcast of the Dudes and Beer podcast. Also, my special 44th birthday episode. I am so happy to have our guest with us this evening, Graham Phillips, world-renowned author. His new book, Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge, has just come out, and he has been making the rounds with it. I have my copy. I am about 3/4 of the way through it right now. Graham, how are you doing today?
The unexpected heat wave over here. The temperatures reached 100 degrees for the first time ever in this country. So,
oh, man.
It's obviously that's nothing where you are, but yeah, that is pretty spectacular.
It's about 105 out right now, so 100 would be great.
It's the whole country's just about ground to a halt. We're just not meant. Nobody's got air conditioning.
I know. I've seen all, and that's just it. You guys over there still live that life without central air, without central heat, things like that. So, man, I can't even imagine what that would be like. At least I've got my nice crisp air conditioner going on in the background. So
I just have to open the windows.
Well, let's get into it real quick, Graham. I know that we had having some connectivity issues. But tell our audience a little bit about your backstory, how you came into the realm of researching things like King Arthur and megalithic cultures, Stonehenge, stuff like that, and what led to the writing of Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge.
Well, it started about 40 years ago when I was an editor of a magazine called Strange Phenomena, which basically investigated all sorts of strange, weird, and wonderful mysteries. Mm-hmm. And I particularly got fascinated by not so much the paranormal side of things, but sort of historical mysteries that had never been solved. And one that had always had me fascinated was, what was the real purpose behind Stonehenge? I'd written other books about, was there a real King Arthur, the story behind the perhaps factual Robin Hood. I'd searched for the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, all sorts of typical Indiana Jones type things. And over the years, gradually, slowly but surely, while I was writing other books, I looked into the mystery of stone circles. And it's only really been now, in the last few years, that archaeology has developed forensically to the point where we can really start to get some idea about what Stonehenge and other stone circles were used for.
And that is what I was so impressed with the book. I know I messaged you the other day, and my wife rarely sees me read, Graham. I'll be honest. I read a lot, but most of it is technical background material. I'm an audio video engineer, so I'm constantly pouring through new technology, things like that. As far as reading, like a book or a nonfiction book or something with a story or a plot, it's pretty rare. And she was like, man, you're just tearing through that book. What's it about? And I was like, he does such a great job weaving hard, thick fact. Because you get in depth in this book, Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge, but you do such a great job of weaving that intricate historic detail, mythologic detail, with storytelling. And it's such a breath of fresh air not to just have dry reading material when it comes to why these structures were created, what the history of them is, what the history of the people that built it are.
Well, the whole thing is so fascinating because although there are other, as they call, megalithic monuments, in other words, megalith from an old word meaning big stone, monuments elsewhere in the world, for example, in northern France, there are prehistoric standing stones and huge great rows of stones, but circles of stones, such as Stonehenge and others like it, are unique to the British Isles. And they started to be built around about 3000 BC, that's 5,000 years ago, and altogether over a period of about 3,000 years, they continued to be built, maintained, repaired, and there was probably around about 15,000 of them altogether. There's certainly over 1,000 still survive in various states of preservation. And they vary in size. I mean, Stonehenge is the most famous, but as I say, it's just one of many. Stonehenge is particularly famous because it's got those arches around the top, the lintel stones. It's the only stone circle that's actually that elaborate. But others are very much bigger. Stonehenge, for example, is about 100 feet in diameter, whereas about 20 miles to the north, there's a stone circle called Avebury, which is 1,000 feet in diameter and made up of around 100 stones, some weighing as much as 50 tons.
Oh, wow.
So there are much bigger stone circles than Stonehenge. There's smaller ones too, but they're spread out throughout the whole of the British Isles, and nobody has really worked out exactly what they were used for. And that's what I decided to do, to put together all the various archaeological research that's been done and kind of try and fit together this jigsaw puzzle, so to speak.
And that's what is so entirely well done, with diagrams, pictures, description within this book. Where has some of the research brought you to? What is your now understanding of these stone circles, the people that built them, and the culture behind it?
Well, there's not just one culture. This is a weird thing. They're known as the megalithic people. It's a general term used for the people who are building and using these stone circles for these 3,000-year period. Now, it's a period in British history which is prehistoric. It's before there were historical records. The Romans were the first ones to bring writing to Britain in the 1st century AD. But for 3,000 years before that, while these stone circles were being built, we're genuinely in a time when no one has written about what they were used for. So it's down to archaeology and guesswork and historical detective work. But as I say, there's a number of different cultures. We start off with a group of people known broadly as the Neolithic people in Britain. They were Stone Age people. They were building things like Stonehenge without using any metal instruments at all. They were using animal antlers for picks. They were using shoulder blades of oxen for shovels, and they were using stone axes. And with nothing more than that, they were digging these trenches around stone circles and embankments, and they were shaping the stones, hacking them out of quarries, moving them. They hadn't invented the wheel. They had no beasts of burden, even though at that time civilization was first starting off in Egypt and a couple of other places in the world. The people in Britain had no overall civilization. They didn't have any overall leadership that has left any archaeological evidence. They didn't have road networks or anything. They were very simple tribal peoples. And they started building these things. And to try and build something like Stonehenge with nothing more than Stone Age implements is a phenomenal achievement in its own right. It'd be the equivalent to us today getting someone on the moon.
Yeah.
But they're not the only people who were doing it. At first, people were thinking, well, they're obviously some kind of religious function. They're a religious monument like the churches or the cathedrals of the past. But what's fascinating is about 500 years after they started to be built, another group of people arrived in Britain who are known as the beaker people because they buried their dead with a small pot or beaker. They had very different style of burial to the original British people. But they, too, we know from the archaeological evidence, helped build and maintain the stone circles, though continuing with their own very separate burial practices. And then this doesn't happen just once. It happens 3 more times. New people come over from the continent, from Belgium, Austria, what's now Germany, and although they continue to practice their same burials, which suggest they're still following the same religion, continue to get involved in stone circle building, which suggests to me anyway that whatever stone circles were, they had some practical rather than religious function.
Well, yeah, and I mean, of course, you bring up in the book the fact that there are very few burial sites found around these stone circles. It's not like these stone circles are encircling a graveyard, anything like that. So to say that they're necessarily have to do with the afterlife, anything like that, is pretty far cry. And to even hear the fact, like you mentioned, that there are cultures coming from across the pond over, and they adapt into building the stone circles, almost like they're adopting part of a culture. And of course, it's hard not to say religious culture, because other than gods and leadership, like you said, there was no centralized leadership of the Britons at that point. So it's not like they are erecting these as monuments to their leaders.
Absolutely not. And what's fascinating is over the last few years, archaeologists have begun to realize that when standing in the center of these stone circles, certain stones are aligned to particular important positions of the moon, the sun, and particularly bright stars at certain times of the year. making them believe that these stone circles were perhaps used as some kind of astronomical calculator. In other words, by using the stars and using the stone circle as kind of like a sighting, somewhere to actually sight the stars from, you could actually work out particular times of the year. And they thought, well, this is probably said to help with the growing, planting, cultivation, reaping of crops. But the thing is, you could do that, as so many civilizations have throughout the world, without having to build a great big stone circle to do it. If you need these permanent stones in place so that you can make very specific measurements based on where the stars are as to what particular time of the day of a particular time of the year it is, then there must have been some very precise calculations involved indeed. The question is, calculating what?
Yeah, and not just what, but why? Why? Like you're saying, if it was for crops, there were many ways to tell what time of year it was without going through that effort. Like you say in the book, millions and millions of man hours just to build Stonehenge.
Yeah, well, there are, but some kinds of crops, some kind of biological extracts that do require very precise calculations. And these are for pharmaceutical products or ancient herbal remedies. Now, we know that this is what the stone circle users were, at least in part, using the stone circles for. Because, as you said, there aren't graves and everything all inside stone circles, but often buried very close to stone circles, sometimes adjacent to them, is a very specific kind of tomb known as a box tomb. It's basically about 18 foot long, about 5 feet wide, 5 feet high, a box, literally an oblong structure made of standing stones. Over the top, you placed capstones. There'll be a stone placed halfway along, dividing it into two separate chambers, and the whole thing was then covered with a mound of earth. Now, these are only ever found close to stone circles, and the kind of people who were buried there are different to the other peoples. Everybody else is being buried in different ways. These are a special caste of people, or a priesthood or something, who are being buried in one side of these box tombs, and their grave goods were being put in the other. Now, archaeologists have only, as I say, recently been able to determine by analyzing the contents of the pottery found in these graves that these pots that were buried along with the occupants contained ancient pharmaceutical substances taken from natural remedies. For example, there was analgesics for controlling pain. There were anticongestants for bronchial problems. There were substances for getting rid of intestinal parasites. And they even had a particular kind of substance taken from something called a thorn apple, which seems to have enabled them to put people into a state of general anesthetic for perhaps painful surgery, such as amputations. Now, in every case, and for a period of around 3,000 years, these box tombs, the people being buried in them are being buried with the tools of their trade, so to speak, these medicinal substances. Now, the only way to actually extract these medicinal substances from various plants is by having very specific timing. You can't just take the thorn apple, as I mentioned, also known in America as the Jimson weed. If you just ate one of those thorn apples on just one happy day, you'd end up poisoning yourself. That's it, you're dead. It has to be picked at a very certain time of a very certain day of the year. And this may be where the particular, the very specific calculations come in that are necessary based on the stars and the positions of the heavenly bodies. There is something else. Mistletoe, for example. There is an extract from the mistletoe flower, which they seem to have used for the control of tumors. because that very same substance is today used by doctors involved with chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Now that's astonishing, but to extract that particular substance from the flower of the mistletoe is literally only on a certain few hours of a certain few days of the year. Why? Because the plant releases a chemical to attract night pollinating moths. And unless you know when that exact time is coming, based on where the moon is and where the stars are, you'll extract something from it which will kill you. So what I'm saying is that it seems to me that based on the discoveries that have been made in these box tombs showing that there were these healer caste of people who seem to have been using the stone circles, then the answer to what the stone circles were used for, a practical purpose, suddenly becomes obvious. They were being used to calculate when to prepare, grow, and cultivate these medicinal substances years before they were being used in modern times.
Wow. And you know, that it makes sense as to why cultures that came over would adopt such a practice.
Precisely. They would adopt it. They would carry on with their own religion. We know this because they continue to bury their dead in the same way as they always had done. And somebody comes up. I mean, for example, you might be one particular kind of religion and you go to another country. You might not follow that country's religion, but you'll certainly use their hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, if they've got a traditional remedy, something like that doctors use over there, you'd surely be using that as well.
Especially if you saw it worked. And what's fascinating is that when Britain comes into a period of history, in other words, when we start to have historical records, the Romans actually tell us far more about these people who are buried in box tombs. For a start, they call them the Druids. Now, until recently, it was always thought that the Druids were just a priestly caste of the Celtic people. That was the last wave of migrants to come to Britain before the Romans around 700 BC. So stone circles were being built way before the Celts first arrived in Britain with the Iron Age.
Yeah.
And most people have thought, well, the Druids are simply this Celtic priesthood because that's as the Romans described them. But they are saying they are the people buried in these box tombs. Well, we now know from archaeology, something the Romans didn't know, that these same people being buried in the same way in box tombs goes back for 3,000 years before the Romans. So whether they were called Druids or not, whoever it is that the Romans are referring to as the Druids are one and the same group of people that seem to have survived for 3,000 years as these healers of megalithic culture. And the Romans tell us that these people did have astonishing cures. Pliny the Elder, for example, a very famous Roman writer in the 1st century, talks about how they use mistletoe to cure tumors, which, of course, we have found now from what's been discovered in their pottery in their tombs.
Yep.
Julius Caesar is absolutely in the 1st century BC when he comes across the Druids for the first time, when he tries to invade Britain, but actually fails on that occasion. He's absolutely astonished by how these Druids, who included both men and women, who lived together in small groups of people close to where stone circles were, and they were trained from a very early age. They were picked up, when still children, for people who had eidetic or photographic memories, people who already had very good memories. And for a period of 20 years, they were trained in all sorts of memory techniques, such as rhyming means. Like if you rhyme something, it's more easy to remember. They also would use techniques such as modern mentalists do as part of staged conjuring tricks, when they can remember many packs of cards one after the other after seeing them just once. It's all done by visualization. They also seem to have used what we would now call hypnosis. And these people were trained to have phenomenal memories, live together, remember all about these medicinal substances, but also of the history of the people, of culture generally, law. and they became the living libraries of the prehistoric people of the British Isles. So the people who were using stone circles like Stonehenge were not just these healers. They had all this stuff committed to memory, so they were like living libraries, and they were also basically keeping society together because they were its knowledge. So that is why I call the book Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge, because this is exactly what they were.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even to go into some of the mythology of Stonehenge, like you do in the book, talking about, I believe it's Geoffrey de Montfort, correct, who put forth the story that Merlin transported it from the Irish Isles over to the Salisbury Plain.
Yeah, that's right. Geoffrey of Monmouth was one and the same character who first introduced most of Europe to the story of King Arthur. He was an historian in the 12th century, and he talks about how he learned of a legend that Merlin, the magician, had been somebody who transported the stones that now make up Stonehenge from somewhere else. Well, it's only recently archaeologists have been able to discover that many of the stones that make up Stonehenge were moved from 130 miles to the west, not actually Ireland, but part of what's now South Wales. And they've even found the exact quarries where these stones were quarried. So what seems to have happened is that originally, the stone circle building practice in Britain didn't start in the south. It started in the north on the Orkney Isles to the north of Scotland. Just started up there in around about 3100 BC, where the very first stone circle is built, which is called the Stones of Stenness, 3 or 4 of which still survive. They still stand. It's moved across very quickly. Obviously, people through trading got to know these stone circle building and what use they were, and they copied the practice. And within about 100 years, it had reached South Wales, and they'd built a stone circle there. But when this community in South Wales, in Western England, Western Britain, decided to move to more lush area, which was in central southern Britain, where Stonehenge now stands, they decided to bring their own stone circle with them. So these stones, I mean, they're not the biggest of the Stonehenge stones, but they're about 8 foot tall, 6 foot tall, and about another 3 feet below the surface. So you're talking about 8-9 foot long stones weighing about 6 tons each.
Wow.
And there's 100 of them. And sorry, not the 100, I think there's 60. Anyway, there's a lot of them. And somehow they managed to either drag them all the way 130 miles, or probably what's more likely, put them onto barges, sailed them around the coast and up a series of rivers until they were quite close to Stonehenge. So these stone circles, obviously to people, they began to probably take on more than just a practical purpose, because if you're going to move stones that far, then obviously people are beginning to think, oh, there's something magical about the stones themselves.
Sure.
But what I find absolutely fascinating is that the legend over 4,000 years later in Geoffrey of Monmouth's time about the stones having been transported from somewhere far to the west still survived.
Exactly. And that's where I see the wisdom keeping, is the fact that these stories are based in fact. These stories like King Arthur, these stories like Merlin the magician, completely and utterly lead you to the fact of, if they aren't actively a person, they are based on a conglomerate of people.
Well, the question is that if you're talking about since the period when the first stones of Stonehenge were put into place 5,000 years ago, until the point when we first had writing in this country, there's a 3,000 year gap, right? Now, somehow, over that 3,000-year period of time, which is like much older than it is from now until the time of the Roman Empire, it's 1,000 years addition onto that, you know? I mean, you're talking a real long period of time ago. Yeah. Somehow, through that period of time, these stories survived about the fact that these stones had been moved. So how else are such stories going to be told unless they are being passed down by word of mouth by some people with some phenomenal memories?
Absolutely. Not just that, but think about just think about the technology and the knowledge that we as a society have lost just in the last 50 years with the birth of technology like what we're doing right here, Graham. There are a lot of kids out there in this upcoming generation that do not know how to use a Dewey Decimal System.
I don't.
Yeah, like literally that knowledge has been lost.
Yes.
You know, and much less the knowledge of, wow, where did these 9-ton stones come from that have been here for like 1,000 years? You know, once they've been there, how they got there becomes myth. Almost, especially within a society that has no written language, has no written history. Everything is carried on by an oral tradition. And what that leads me to is Native American, all the other myths and traditions. How much of those are based on fact?
Well, putting it this way, here's a couple more of the megalithic mysteries,
please,
which seem to have been passed on down through history. At Stonehenge, outside the main circle, there's a stone called the heel stone. It's outside the main circle of stone, and it's a particular prominent stone. And on Midsummer's Day, the sun rises directly over it, and only on that day of the year. So it was obviously part of their astronomical calculator. And in fact, today, modern Druids, who incidentally have got nothing to do with the Druids of old, they were refounded in the 19th century based on what the Romans had said about them and so forth. But they still meet there on Midsummer's Day, on the midsummer solstice, and the sun rises over this stone. Now, the local legend is, again, we're talking about legends similar to the one that Geoffrey of Monmouth tells us about Merlin moving his stones. The story is it's called the heel stone because the legend is that the devil once lived inside Stonehenge, and a friar, like Friar Tuck, like a priest, came to the stone circle, Stonehenge, to try and exorcise the devil. And the devil, of course, wasn't very happy about this, and he chased the friar off, and the friar ran for it, and he picked up, the devil did, one of the huge great stones, hurled it at the friar, just missed him, and hit him on the heel. And that's where the stone still lies. And that's the legend about how the heel stone got its name. It's known originally as the friar's heel stone, or shortened to the heel stone. But what's fascinating is Frios heel in ancient Celtic and also in modern Greek means rising sun.
Oh, wow.
In other words, somebody had said this is rising sunstone, and over the years, Frios heel, and they didn't speak either ancient Greek or ancient Celtic, so consequently they said, well, why is it called the friar's heel? Well, because the devil threw a stone at him. So you see that, and there's loads more of these tales. Something was found actually, which is really interesting, on a burial site in the southwest of England, on the middle of Dartmoor. That's barren moorlands. A Bodmin Moor in Cornwall, barren moorlands in the west of Britain. And there was this ghost story that was passed on through the years that if you walked out across the moorlands at night and you got lost in the mist, a helpful druid would appear there, or a man in white robes, who would offer you water to drink out of a golden cup or offered you refreshments from a golden cup. And this legend associated with this old burial mound that nobody had ever dug up went on for centuries. It's recorded right back to Roman times. And everybody thought, oh, yeah, there's a druid with a golden cup haunts that place. When it was eventually excavated in recent years, not only did they find the remains of what seems to have been some priestly burial of an individual, he was buried with a golden cup.
Yeah.
So it's and yet the archaeologists said that hadn't been disturbed for thousands of years. So the story was passed on and eventually became a folk tale or a ghost story.
Yeah, exactly. Became a children's bedtime story. Something that you use as a warding. Like don't go over there. Like almost like a modern day Hansel and Gretel. Like don't go out in the woods by yourself, or else this is going to happen. You go out there, you're gonna run across the druid's ghost.
Well, you can bring what I tend to do. I mean, people have said to me, how come you manage to solve all these things and other people haven't? Well, it's not that I'm actually doing the digging like the archaeologists or finding some ancient writing that's never been seen before. People had read Julius Caesar's works or the works of Pliny the Elder. Archaeologists have been digging all over the place. But what I tend to do is to say, okay, I'll go and see a bunch of archaeologists. The problem is because they have to be so technical, they can't do anything other than be very narrow-minded and only able to focus on a very specific place, a very particular part of history. And the same goes for historians. And so they all have different parts of the puzzle that nobody has taken an overall point of view and brought together. And I find that if I speak to archaeologists, I speak to historians, I look at the research that's being done, but obviously not as deep as they have, but just at the conclusions that they've reached. And then, in addition to that, I look at the folklorists. What has folklore told us? What are the local ghost stories or traditions in the area? Because like what I said about the Druid's Cup or the heel stone or the stones being moved to build Stonehenge, a lot of these local legends can help us to understand what really went on in the past. So if I put together historical information, archaeological information, and folklore and myths and legends, I put all that together and I tend to be able to come up with answers that nobody else has been free to do.
Yeah, and amazing answers, great answers, Graham, that literally once you start looking at the evidence provided, the scientific evidence that's there, the dating of stones, the cultures that existed, it just fits together. It's literally like looking at a puzzle and going, oh yeah, that fits right there. And it's amazing to see how it is laid out in Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge. Like I said, I am about 3/4 of the way through it, and so glad that you, even in our conversation casually here, hit on like 3/4 of the things that I wanted to bring up, just naturally, because it's a course of your investigation. It's how you synthesize data that brings you to these conclusions. And it's something that we talk about on the show all the time, is being able to look at data dispassionately, being able to take this person's story and that person's story, take the commonality between the two, and then the other data that's provided, and draw a conclusion from that. And it's so great to see somebody doing that with ancient cultures, with this kind of information.
To me, the big mystery that still survives, the mystery as to what was Stonehenge. There is a certain amount of showmanship involved in Stonehenge. I don't think it needed all those arches all around it, but obviously larger communities wanted to attract more of a following. And so some places like the Avebury Circle, as I mentioned, which is truly huge, about 1,000 feet in diameter. In fact, it's a half a mile walk if you go all around the outside of it. they went for size, but 20 miles to the south, Stonehenge decided to impress by shaping stones so perfectly that they could put all those arches around it. So there is a certain amount of showmanship, although the vast majority of stone circles are simple standing stones. But what was Stonehenge? Well, I think my answer to that would be it was a prehistoric healthcare facility. But the big mystery that survives is, where did all this start off? Until recently, until archaeologists were able to date things more precisely, everyone thought that the stone circle building tradition must have started in the south, which is closer to continental Europe, and it moved north. But it didn't. As I mentioned earlier, it started on the Orkney Isles, a small group of islands just off the very north of Scotland at the top of Britain. And it seems to have suddenly started fully formed. The same stone, you've got the first stone circles being built. You've got people being buried in tombs, in these box tombs, with these jars containing perfectly made pharmaceutical products. Now, there has to have been some kind of trial and error involved in it, because, well, you can't just pick something off and try that. And, well, a lot of people must have died, or a lot of people must have done a lot of research into this over the years before they started doing it at the Orkney Isles. The question is, where did it come from? There's no evidence of it anywhere else in the north, in Scandinavia or in Iceland. It's almost as if there's a lost civilization somewhere.
Well, and it's interesting because just the other day I was with a very, very good friend's father in Dallas, and we were watching a show on TV, Mountain Men. I love that show whenever I'm on the road, and it shows this old trapper cleaning a coyote fur down. And I was like, man, I always wanted to learn how to tan a hide. And literally, as the guy went to put the coyote head, he was like scraping stuff out. He was like, oh, yeah, well, what you have to do is scrape the brains out and boil them off, and you'll be left with tannin. And I was like, what? And then the guy did it. And I was like, dude, seriously, at what point did an ancient culture sit there and go, you know what's missing from this? You know what? We've been doing a good job with these furs, but what's missing, I think we need to scoop the brains out and boil them and then rub that on the fur, you know?
What gave him the idea to do it?
Exactly. What gave him the idea? And I mean, as someone who's taking survival classes, stuff like that, grew up hunting, fishing, learning the plants around me that were safe to eat, that kind of stuff. A lot of that comes from, like the field test. If you're out somewhere in strange land that you don't know, but you see something that looks familiar, you take a small piece of it and break it and touch it to your tongue and lips. And then you wait 15 minutes and see if any ill effects happen. You see if your tongue starts getting numb, things like that. And that will give you the indicators as to whether or not there's poison present, whether or not there's not. But when it comes to like, dude, what we need to do is scrape the brains out of this and boil it and apply it to the skin, and that'll cure it and make it soft. Like, who thinks of that? Where did that come from? Where did the idea of putting these stones in a circle to track the movement of the stars and planets, where did that come from?
Well, it certainly would have taken some. You've got to find somewhere where there's some kind of earlier forerunner to it, where they're making smaller stone circles, where they've just got a few medicinal substances, not the whole lot already made.
Yeah.
What you see when you're at the reason I can say that it's already a fully formed culture with all this healing and use of stone circles as astronomical calculator is concerned, is that the first stone circle that we know of was built on the Orkney Isles in 3100 BC, give or take a few years. Within 100 years, it's spread throughout most of Britain, and the first stones of Stonehenge are being put into place. For it to move that quickly, everybody's saying, wow, this is a good idea. It's already fully formed. Somebody's already perfected the product.
Yeah.
Well, if it was perfected on the Orkney Isles, that means it has to have come from somewhere else. But there's no evidence whatsoever from anywhere else in the north, like like Scandinavia, Iceland, anywhere there, that has got stone circles or even anything remotely like this. So and there's nowhere south where it could have sailed north of. I think somebody has just found something that looks a bit like a stone circle off the coast of Spain, but it really is very little. It's not the same kind of thing as there is in the north of Britain. And also there's Göbekli Tepe, which was ancient stone sort of stone circle, which was very much earlier, but that's different and that's much more elaborate. It's clearly built as a temple form rather than something for viewing the stars. So, but what's fascinating is that the Romans tell us when they arrived in Britain, they were told tales by the local people that there was an island once to the north of Britain or off the coast of Britain, which has sunk into the sea, which they called Thule. It's their version, the Roman version of Atlantis. And obviously most archaeologists, historians will say, well, it's just a made up thing. But it was made up. It was told to them by the Druids of Britain, who are the same people, remember, who seem to have been remembering things like the reason for our heel stone and the fact that the stones of Stonehenge were moved from somewhere else. So maybe there was some prehistoric island north of Britain where it could have started. In fact, it's very possible because not long before the first stone circles were built, the sea levels were a lot lower because the ice was still melting from the last ice age. So it could have been a land which sunk beneath the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would not, like we've said before, not the only culture to have a story like that. The stories of flood occur all over the world, culture to culture, and they all happen right up around the same time. Very interesting. And whenever you start looking at that anecdotal evidence, it's hard to get past that when people have been talking about this the same way for thousands of years. It's hard to get past that. At least for me.
There's two reasons why I think people throughout the world have got these flood stories. One is that on the top of mountains, they find fossilized shells. Yeah. So consequently, they think at one point water must have covered high mountains. Okay, we know why fossilized shells end up on top of mountains because continents are being lifted up and scratched back into the ground again. Sure. If there is such a word as scratched.
There is now.
There is now. But the other one, and this is fascinating to me, is that civilization, farming technique. I mean, the human beings like us have been around for like 250,000 years, perhaps longer. But it was only in the last 10 to 12,000 years that they started to settle and grow and cultivate crops. Yeah. And this happened after the last ice age. So the very earliest dawnings or beginnings of civilization, like things like Göbekli Tepe, were built just at the end of the ice age. Now, when the ice age ended, over a period of another 1,000 years or so, the waters started rising as the ice melted. And this flooded a lot of places that were once habitable. I mentioned before about the Beaker people who came to Britain in 2500 BC. They came from what is now the Netherlands. And the area of the Netherlands that they lived was being flooded because it's low-lying area and the sea levels are rising. So they actually got on their sort of fairly simple boats as they were then and came to Britain. So I do think there's a lot of civilizations throughout the world, people who had started to get culture going that were wiped out by the rising sea levels caused by the end of the last ice age.
Yeah, and not only that, but the recovery of knowledge, the survival of knowledge from that, the fact that our stories reach back to that. That's what I find most amazing, and the fact that you have been distilling that through anecdotal history as well as the work of actual historians, the work of archaeologists. Like I said, the means by which you synthesize information is absolutely unique and amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and like you said, unfortunately, it's the fact that so many scientists, so many historians have to view things from a myopic point of view.
Yeah, well, that's all they can do. I mean, they have to qualify for so long to be able to do just a little bit that they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it does. We've talked about it on the show before. These barriers to science, these barriers to history, really do hinder us in the actual finding of truth. They really do hinder us in a lot of ways when it comes to finding out our origins, when it comes to finding out scientific fact on a lot of things, and even trying to get funding for research into things that most people would consider to be in the paranormal, like, for instance, search for Bigfoot, search for why Stonehenge was built, things like that. It's hard to get funding for that kind of stuff because, yeah, most people are looking at it from a paranormal aspect instead of a true historical aspect.
Yeah, I mean, really, with like King Arthur, for example, I mean, I did a whole host of research into King Arthur and came up with a possible location where the figure behind the story was buried. And the archaeologists were fascinated by it. But the English Heritage, which is the group in Britain belonging to the government who decides who can dig where, when, and whatever, if it's a preserved monument, turned around and said, oh, no, we're not having that. It's to do with King Arthur. I said, no, I'm not talking about this kind of floaty man who fights dragons. We're talking about an historical figure upon whom the legend was based.
Yeah.
But no, they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have it.
Yeah, and precisely. There's a means by which to get answers, but so often the road is blocked. And it's sad when it comes to that, but it is great to see that there are people like you out there searching for this information, out there actively trying to find the missing pieces to the puzzles, and to reintroduce us to the lost wisdom of the Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge, things like that. So,
well, thank you very much. And people, everything I've been talking about, I've made quite a few short films that I put on my YouTube channel, which is Graham Phillips author. If you just look up my YouTube channel, I've done quite a few little short films I've made about all these sites I've been talking about these tombs, these box tombs, the archaeological work that's gone on. And if anybody wants to see how big Avebury Stone Circle is and so on, it's all there. And so I make these little films, whether you read the book or not. Take a look at those.
Amazingly well done. I know I have at least 15 or 20 times shown people the one on the greenstone.
Oh, right. That's another story altogether.
Oh no. You've got to come back on and talk about the greenstone at some point.
I'm starting to promote the greenstone.
I know.
Anniversary edition in the next few weeks. So I'll come back to you about that.
Oh, that would be great. I would love to have you on. This has been one of the most enlightening conversations that we have ever had on this show, Graham. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing this massive amount of knowledge that you have on the topic of Stonehenge, the actual prehistory of the British people. Like I said in your intro, one of the most world-renowned researchers when it comes to these topics, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat with us today, to share this information, to share your realm of knowledge with our audience.
Well, absolutely my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on.
Anytime. Anytime you have something that you want to talk about, feel free to give me a message, and we'll absolutely have you on, Graham.
Cool.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, and take care. Godspeed with everything that you're doing. And that wraps our amazing interview with author Graham Phillips about his new book, Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge. It's available in the Dudes and Beer store. It is available on Amazon.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for continuing to tune in Tuesday after Tuesday, year after year. This is episode 232. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and the audience means so much. Your involvement means so much. Thank you so much for continuing to listen, continuing to keep an open mind, continuing to keep an open heart in this world of ours. Thank you so much to Bobalu Cigar Company for hosting us tonight, to Jeff Lipton, to the crew, to the staff here. One last time, we will be going out with a Bobalu commercial for those guys and our outro. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We'll talk to you soon. If you can't be good at it. Bye-bye.
There's like the flavor of a fine cigar. That's why at Bobalu Cigar, we take the time to make the best cigars you can find. Every Bobalu cigar is hand-rolled on site by our skilled torcedores, guaranteeing your total satisfaction in every draw, from first light to last dash. Have a wedding or fundraiser? About to get married or have a baby? Are you signing a big contract or opening a new business? No matter the celebration, Bobalu Cigars is here to help. With our custom label cigar service, you can get a box of your favorite Bobalu cigars with your company name, logo, or message printed right on the ring. You can even have Bobalu come roll cigars live at your event. Join the Buyers Club and get half off every cigar every time you buy. Stop on by BobaluCigar.com and place your order, or give us a call at 1-888-332-4427. Visit us online at Bobalu.com today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Podcast. To listen to our audio streams or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for Android and iDevices, available on Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors and other podcasts on this network, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.